Greetings, class. I hope you guys are doing well and staying safe. I am here to go over the Ruben Martinez essay, The Crossing. And this is the third time I've recorded this essay. I had trouble with my throat. I was coughing a lot in the last two videos. So this is my third attempt of The Crossing. Let me say this. I love this essay. I think Ruben Martinez is a great writer. I love his hook. He says, "I am again on the line." I think that's such a clever line. And the reason why is he strings this through his entire essay. In fact, he ends with his hook. He says, "I tell myself I did the right thing. I tell myself I did the wrong thing. I tell myself that every decision on the line is like that, somewhere in between." And I think that is such a clever hook, and it's a great metaphor that he weaves through his whole essay. And the reason why I like that is because of this. On one hand, the line that he's talking about is a physical border. It's a border crossing the United States. And on the other hand, it's a metaphor because it's a conscious decision. He's asking himself, did he do the right thing or did he do the wrong thing in turning Victor in or helping Victor? So I think it's a great line. I love it. And I really like his first three paragraphs. I like it because he talks about the border, and I think that's important to us because we live in San Diego. We live next to the busiest border in the entire world, the Tijuana border. And what he's saying is that the northern perspective of the border, how we perceive the border, it's a place where we go to party. We go to have fun. And he says that exactly. He says, in the second paragraph, I'm reading his words. These are not my words. He says, "The swaggering American will have his way with the Mexican senorita. The post-colonial representations of borderlands literature produced by Mexicans, Americans alike have yet to soften the edges of the spring break syndrome." And he goes on. He says a lot of things here, very derogatory things on some level as well. But what he's saying is that we view the Mexican border as a place to party, a place to have fun. And I think that was true. I don't know if that's still true because a lot of people are afraid to go to Mexico now, especially Tijuana. But talking to students, they say, yeah, we still go down there. And you can be 18, you can drink, you can have a good time. And if you really listen to what he's saying, I think it's very clever. He's saying that the Mexican border is a place for Americans to be free. We can be liberated. Anytime you watch a movie and you have bad guys running from the cops, they're always going to go to Mexico to be free. We hear that all the time. We see that a lot. And I think that's interesting. And then in his next paragraph, he says, "The climax of Cheech Marin's Born in East LA fulfills every migrant's fantasy of a joyous rush of brown humanity breaching a hapless border patrol, the victory of simple desire over military technology that occurs thousands of times a day on the border and feeds a paranoid vision of Reconquista." And what he's saying here is very clever. He's saying that the southern perspective of the border, how Latinos see the border, is a place of freedom. So they're coming here to escape poverty. They're coming here to escape cartels, violence, corrupt government, and they're coming here to be free. And I find that really interesting, and I never thought about it until I read this essay. So it's like this. You have two people coming down a road. You have a person coming on this side of the road. You have a person coming on this side of the road, and they're both passing each other on the way to freedom. So we see the border as a place of freedom. In Latin America, they see the United States as a place of freedom, and I find that so interesting. And Ruben Martinez, what he's doing here is he's telling a story, and one of the most important things about a story is location, setting. And so this place is set on the border. Most people know that by reading this essay, but you have to read it carefully because there's some irony here as well. And he's good at this. He says that they are on the Buenos Aires National Wildlife Refuge. And I find that so interesting because here is a place we're going to save burrowing owls. We're going to save coyotes. We're going to save rattlesnakes. We're going to save cactus. But you can't save a person. If you try to save a person, you're going to go to prison. And I find that very, very ironic. And then there's another paragraph I like, and if I was in class with you guys, I'd spend a lot of time on this. It's such a great paragraph. It's very well written. And he says, take the microcosm. I'm reading page 3 down at the bottom. He says, take the microcosm of the Buenos Aires Wildlife Refuge and its immediate vicinity. The birders and the migrants, the Samaritans and the Minutemen, hunters and stoners, a dude ranch that charges city slickers up to $2,500 a week, retirees of modest means, hellfire Protestants and Catholic penitents, and New Age vortex seekers. Living here or passing through are Americans and Native Americans and Mexican Americans and Mexican Indians, all of varying shades and accents, and there are Iranians and Guatemalans and Chinese. This kind of situation was once affectionately referred to as a melting pot, but no, it is more like speaking in tongues, speaking in babble. The tower is crumbling, melting pot meltdown. And I think it's very well written. And what he's saying is, we have all these people who were once migrants, and they've settled in this area, and we have this melting pot where it's supposed to be like a soup where we just all blend together, we get along. And what he's saying is we're not getting along anymore. There's a lot of hostility, there's a lot of division, and the melting pot is now crumbling down. I think that's very well written. And one of the most important elements of the story is motivation. And you have to ask yourself, why is Ruben Martinez here? And he is here because he wants to interview an undocumented immigrant. And he looks all day, and he doesn't find anybody. And right when he's about to leave, he sees somebody crossing the road. And as soon as he sees a person, he finds out the guy is diabetic. Victor says he's diabetic. And for a long time, I really questioned the validity of this story. Because this is written as nonfiction, it's supposed to be true, but I'm like, there's a lot of things that I question if this is a true story or not. And so, this guy says he's diabetic, and so he, in a situation like this, you see somebody having a medical emergency, the very first thing you and I would do is call 911, but he can't call 911 because he has no service. And then he says that in the backseat of his car, he has enough supplies to keep a dozen hikers going for at least a day in the desert. Powered bars, fruit cups, tins of Vienna sausages, peanut butter crackers, bags of trail mix, several bottles of Gatorade, a gallon jug of drinking water. So he has enough in his back car to fuel a dozen hikers. And then he gives them a fruit roll-up. And I would think that if you found a starving man in the desert and you tried to give him a fruit roll-up, you would think that this person would just devour this. He'd just rip into it. But Victor doesn't eat it quickly. He eats it very, very slowly. And some people might question that, but it does make sense because he's diabetic. And if you're diabetic, you have low blood sugar, so you don't have a lot of energy. And if he eats this too fast, he's going to get sick. So, on page 6, one of the very first paragraphs, Ruben Martinez knows that if he picks this guy up, it's a felony. He can go to prison. And the felony is U.S. Code Title 8, Chapter 12, Subchapter 2, Part 8, Section 1324, stipulates that an American citizen breaks a law when knowing or in reckless disregard of the fact that an alien has come to, entered or remains in the United States in violation of law, transport or move or attempts to transport or move such an alien within the United States by some means of transportation or otherwise in furtherance of such violation of the law. So he has this quote. And I find this interesting because he's writing this in the spur of the moment. And I question this. If you're in the spur of the moment, do you think like this? Would you say, you know what? I can't pick you up right now. And the reason why is because of U.S. Code Title 8, Chapter 12. I don't think most of us would remember this, so I think my first instinct would be this story might be a bit embellished. Maybe we have an unreliable narrator, but I think on a deeper level, I think that this shows the complexity of the law, and you start to wonder, if this is that detailed, what is Section 1325? And so he knows that he's breaking the law, and he tells Victor to get in the car. And I think one thing I like to ask students would be, would you help Victor? And if you would help him, how far would you go? And some people say, I'd give him food, and that's all I could do. Some people would say I would give him a ride, but only to the hospital. Some people say they'd take him to Los Angeles. So I think that everybody is different here. Some people say there's no way I would pick him up or help him because I would go to prison. And I think if you're a woman, you might say, I don't want to have a stranger in my car. So there's a lot of variables here. But I think it's important to put yourself in Ruben Martinez's shoes. What would you do if you were in this situation? And Ruben Martinez tells Victor to get in the car. And as soon as they're in the car, they're driving down the road. Victor's feeling better. And it's on page 7 where he starts to say that he's feeling better. And then Victor starts asking, how far is it to Arizona? How far is it to Phoenix? How far is it to Los Angeles? And I would think that if I was in that situation, I'd say, time out. You're feeling better. If you get pulled over, I'm in trouble, you're in trouble, you're going to get deported, you're going to have to go back. So I have all this food in the back of my car. Here you go. You're safe. You're on your own. Some people might not feel good about that. You might say that he was still diabetic and he might relapse. Something might happen, so I want to make sure he gets to the hospital. But I would really question that. What would we do? And I think the reason why Ruben Martinez might be more invested than we might be is because they're from the same town. They're from El Salvador. Right? El Salvador? Yeah. Soyapanga. And so he also realizes this guy, they're from the same town as well. And he realized that this guy walked 1,800 miles. He traveled for 1,800 miles. So I think he has a deeper connection to him than we would because they're from the same town. And so he decides he's going to drive him to a gas station, and he goes inside and he's telling this clerk, you know what, I have an undocumented immigrant in my car. He's diabetic. We need to call an ambulance. And then he's like, time out, don't call, because in his head, he remembers that off in the distance, there's a camp that helps undocumented immigrants with medical needs. So he gets Victor in the car. And I couldn't imagine what it would feel like to be Victor, going through all of these things. So Victor's in the car, and they're racing down these winding roads trying to get to this camp. And then on the way, Ruben Martinez remembers that he can't take him to this camp because they're going to deport Victor if he takes him there. My question is if he could remember this code, chapter 6:13-24, how could he not remember that this place, he couldn't take him to this place? Why wouldn't he already know that? And some people say, well, when you're in the state of panic, you don't think properly, and I think that's fair. But what he does is he takes Victor all the way back to that gas station, and he walks in the store, and he sees Victor looking outside, and he's staring at America, and he's here, he finally made it, and he's seeing freedom. And Ruben Martinez calls the Border Patrol, and essentially they're going to help Victor, but he's also going to get deported. And there's a lot of questions here that goes back to that idea of on the line. And some people say that he really did Victor a disservice, because if he would have just given him this food and this water, Victor would have been fine. He wouldn't have been deported 1,800 miles. And some people say, well, he was diabetic and he may have died, and it's better to take a chance of not having somebody die than and if they get deported, they still have a chance to come back if they choose to. So it's really, I like this essay because it really puts this into the perspective of what's going on the border. And I don't think a lot of Americans really understand the border and what's been going on there. And the reason why I got into the idea is if this story is true or not is many years ago, I was teaching this story to a class, and I had a student who wrote Ruben Martinez a letter. He sent him an email. This is a true story. And don't do this. Don't start writing our authors in class with these types of questions. But he asked Ruben Martinez, he just sent an email. He's like, I read your story, The Crossing. I don't think it's true. I think you lied. And so Ruben Martinez, the writer of this essay, actually wrote the student back, and he said, you know what, I'm glad you brought this up because other people have questioned that as well, but as a journalist, I find it would be very unethical on my part to fabricate and to lie. So this story is 100% true. So there you go. The story is solved, but that's kind of a side note to a very fascinating story. And again, what I think this essay does is it gives us a great landscape and a great perspective of what's been happening on the border.